There are sorrows that pierce like thorns in the soul. When I lost everything I loved, my hands remained empty and my eyes dry, unable to weep. Silence became my only companion, until that night, an unleashed storm, a solitary barn, and eyes deep as wet earth that looked at me without judgment. Sometimes life finds us precisely when we believe we've lost it forever. Can a withered heart bloom again under the right rain? If this story has touched your soul, gift me the warmth of your heart with a like. Each one is an embrace that reminds me we are never truly alone. And now, tell me, how do you think this story of loss and rediscovery will end? Your voice is part of the path we travel together. In the spring of 1883, an enormous storm lashed the Texas prairies. The sky, once an infinite blue, had transformed into a canvas of black clouds that unleashed their fury upon the parched earth. Isabella Harper, 28 years old with her heart racing wildly, ran through the rain seeking shelter, her soaked skirts clinging to her legs like a second skin. Her chestnut hair, normally gathered in an impeccable bun, had become a damp tangle that whipped her face. She spotted a solitary barn in the distance, a weathered structure that rose like a hunched giant in the middle of the prairie. Without thinking twice, she pushed the heavy wooden door and slipped inside, where the aroma of hay and old leather welcomed her. Her lungs burned from the effort, and the echo of her labored breathing resonated among the ancient beams. She thought she was alone until a movement in the shadows caught her attention. A man emerged from the gloom, tall as the oaks she had left behind, with broad shoulders and eyes the color of damp earth. He wore a wide-brimmed hat that dripped over his face, weathered by sun and wind. "The storm won't give respite until dawn," he said in a deep voice, hoarse as if the words had to pass through stones before emerging. Isabella tensed, instinctively reaching for the small knife she kept in her skirt pocket. It was a gesture she had perfected over the years, a constant reminder that the world rarely offered kindness without expecting something in return. "Daniel Crawford," he introduced himself, keeping his distance, as if he could read the distrust in her eyes. "I work with horses at the Morrison Ranch." Lightning briefly illuminated the barn's interior, revealing Isabella's face. Her eyes, an intense green, shone with determination as she evaluated the stranger. She didn't respond immediately. Words had never been her allies. She preferred silence where no one could misinterpret her intentions. "Isabella Harper," she finally said, her voice barely audible over the wind's roar. Daniel nodded once, an austere but respectful gesture, and returned to his corner, where a small oil lamp cast dancing shadows on the weathered wall. He didn't ask what a woman was doing alone in the storm, where she came from or where she was headed. Instead, he offered her the greatest gift Isabella could imagine at that moment: judgment-free silence. While the rain pounded the roof furiously, Isabella observed this quiet man, this Daniel Crawford, who seemed as comfortable in his solitude as she was in hers. And for the first time in a long while, she felt that perhaps, just perhaps, not all refugees were temporary. Dawn arrived timidly, as if the sun feared to wake the earth after the night's violence. Isabella woke with a start, disoriented for a moment, until the previous night's events returned to her memory. She had fallen asleep on a pile of hay, with her shawl as her only blanket. Daniel was already standing, feeding a black horse that Isabella hadn't noticed the night before. His movements were precise, economical, like those of someone who had learned that every gesture must have a purpose. "Willowbrook is an hour's ride away," he said without turning, as if he had sensed Isabella's awakening. "I can take you there if that's where you're headed." Isabella sat up, smoothing her wrinkled skirt in an attempt to recover some dignity. A question floated in the air between them. What was a woman like her, with delicate hands that didn't belong to hard fieldwork, doing in the middle of nowhere? "Thank you," she responded, avoiding explanations she wasn't ready to give. During the journey, mounted behind Daniel on the imposing black horse, Isabella kept her back rigid, careful to barely brush against the man's body. The landscape surrounding them was a watercolor of greens and browns, with the storm-washed sky showing an almost painful blue in its intensity. Daniel didn't try to fill the silence with empty words. Isabella secretly appreciated this, while her thoughts wandered to the past she had left behind. Her childhood in a large cold house, where affection was considered an unforgivable weakness. Her father, a respected but absent businessman, and her mother a silent shadow who faded a little more each day. And then, the revelation that had shattered the fragile structure of her life. She wasn't the legitimate daughter of the Harper marriage. She was the living reminder of a mistake, an indiscretion that her mother had never forgiven. This knowledge, whispered on a night similar to the previous one, had been the catalyst that pushed her to flee, to seek answers that perhaps didn't even exist. The horse stopped in front of a small inn on the outskirts of Willowbrook. A weathered sign swayed over the entrance, "The Traveller's Rest." "Sarah Brennan is the owner," said Daniel, helping her dismount with a touch so light she barely felt it. "She's a good woman. She'll treat you well." Their gazes met for an instant, and Isabella felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the morning's cool air. There was something in Daniel's eyes, a familiar pain, as if he too carried scars that couldn't be seen, but defined each of his steps. "Thank you for the shelter," she said, and for the first time in a long while, the words came out with sincerity. Daniel simply touched the brim of his hat in a farewell gesture, before turning his horse and riding away down the dusty road. Isabella watched him leave, wondering if she would cross paths again with this man of few words and deep eyes. She didn't know then that fate rarely offers coincidences without purpose, and that the encounter during the storm was merely the first thread of a much more complex tapestry that time would weave. Sarah Brennan's inn turned out to be exactly what Isabella needed, a clean, discreet place where no one asked too many questions. Sarah herself, a middle-aged widow with calloused hands and a genuine smile, offered her not only a room, but also work in the kitchen to help with expenses. "I don't know how to cook very well," Isabella confessed with downcast eyes, ashamed of this deficiency that revealed her privileged upbringing. Sarah observed her with shrewd eyes, noting the soft hands and erect posture that betrayed her origin. "And what do you know how to do, child?" In response, Isabella extracted a small handkerchief from her travel bag. It was a piece of white linen, transformed by her hands into a work of art. Tiny wildflowers embroidered with colored threads formed a dance on the fabric, so real they almost seemed to move with the breeze. Sarah took the handkerchief with reverence, running her fingers over the perfect stitches that told a story without words. "My God, this is—" she whispered and didn't need to finish the sentence. 3 days later, Isabella found herself installed in a small corner of the inn's common room, surrounded by fabrics and threads. Sarah, with her business instinct, had seen an opportunity. The town's women, hungry for beauty amid the harshness of frontier life, paid well for embroidery commissions for special occasions. It was there, with her head bent over a piece of silk destined to become the wedding veil for the blacksmith's daughter, where Isabella saw Daniel Crawford again. He entered the inn like a shadow, silent and contained, and headed directly to the bar where Sarah served drinks. Isabella pretended not to notice him, but her fingers tensed around the needle, betraying her apparent indifference. Through her lashes, she watched him converse briefly with Sarah, who pointed in her direction with a discreet gesture. Daniel approached with measured steps, like someone approaching a frightened animal. "Miss Harper," he greeted, removing his hat in a gesture of courtesy that seemed to belong to another era. "I'm glad to see you've settled in." Isabella nodded, without completely lifting her gaze from her work. "Mr. Morrison needs someone with skills like yours," he continued, the words coming out with effort, as if each one cost more than the last. "His wife passed away a year ago. The big house needs a feminine touch, and he can no longer see well enough to read his letters and documents." The proposal hung between them like an unasked question. Isabella finally raised her gaze, meeting Daniel's direct look. "Why me?" she asked, distrust surfacing like an old friend. "You barely know me." A hint of a smile, so brief it almost went unnoticed, crossed Daniel's face. "Sometimes you know more about a person in one stormy night than in years of empty conversations," he replied simply. That night, Isabella couldn't sleep. She approached the small window of her room, observing the stars that dotted the Texas sky. Daniel's proposal represented a risk. It meant binding herself, creating roots, exposing herself to new disappointments. But it also offered an opportunity she hadn't considered, the possibility of belonging. With the first rays of dawn, she made her decision. She packed her few belongings, left an embroidered handkerchief as thanks for Sarah, and went out to meet Daniel, who waited for her mounted on his black horse, as if he had never doubted her answer. The road to the Morrison ranch stretched before them like a blank canvas, ready to be filled with stories not yet told. And while they rode in silence under the rising sun, Isabella felt for the first time in a long while something resembling hope. The Morrison ranch rose like a monument to better times, a two-story house with white columns and broad galleries that surrounded it like protective arms. Around it, the stables, barns, and workers' cabins formed a small self-sufficient community. Nathan Morrison waited on the porch, an imposing figure despite his advanced age and walnut cane. His snow-white hair contrasted with his bronzed face, furrowed by wrinkles that spoke of sun, wind, and difficult decisions. "So you're the girl," he said by way of greeting, studying her with blue eyes that still retained an unsettling sharpness. "Daniel says you have an artist's hands and the discretion of a tomb. I need both things." There was no warmth in the welcome, but no hostility either. It was the pragmatic evaluation of a man, accustomed to judging the value of things and people with a glance. The room assigned to her had belonged to the late Mrs. Morrison. Everything in it spoke of an absence that continued to weigh in the air. Perfume bottles still lined up on the vanity, a brush with silver hairs among the bristles, a silver thimble by the window. It was as if the house held its breath, waiting for the return of someone who would never come back. The days soon acquired a predictable rhythm. In the mornings, Isabella helped Nathan with correspondence, reading letters to him and writing responses under his dictation. In the afternoons, she dedicated herself to restoring order in a house that had slowly succumbed to chaos after its mistress's death. It was during those afternoons, while organizing drawers and wardrobes, that she began to know Victoria Morrison through the objects she had left behind. She discovered that she had been a cultured woman with refined tastes. Her books, carefully annotated in the margins, revealed a curious mind. Her dresses, now stored under sheets to protect them from dust, told the story of someone who had brought with her the elegance of a previous life to this remote place. Daniel appeared in the big house infrequently, preferring the company of horses to that of people. But when they coincided, Isabella felt his gaze following her, attentive and cautious, as if he expected to discover a secret in her movements. One afternoon, while cleaning Nathan's study, she found an old photograph in the bottom of a drawer. It showed a young couple in front of the same house decades ago. The man was clearly a younger Nathan, but the woman wasn't Victoria. It was someone else, with a face surprisingly similar to her own. The discovery left her breathless. Who was this woman who could have been her older sister? And why did Nathan keep this photograph in secret? That night, during the silent dinner they shared in the dining room too large for two people, Isabella gathered the courage to ask, "Mr. Morrison, today I found a photograph." Nathan's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. His eyes, normally distant, fixed on her with an intensity that almost made her step back. "Rebecca Stone," he said, pronouncing the name like someone reciting a prayer. "My first love. She left 40 years ago, taking everything that mattered with her." He added nothing more, and silence settled between them again, now charged with unanswered questions. But something had changed. Looking at her, Isabella was certain that Nathan no longer saw only the woman he had hired, but also the ghost of a past that refused to die. That night, while the wind whispered secrets among the old house's walls, Isabella understood that it wasn't coincidence that had brought her here. Invisible threads connected her to this place and these people, in a plot she was barely beginning to glimpse. With this unsettling revelation lulling her, she sank into restless sleep, where a woman with her face extended her hand across an abyss of time. The sun had barely peeked over the horizon when Isabella, unable to sleep again, left the house. Dew covered the grass like tiny diamonds, and the fresh air carried with it the promise of a hot day. Without a defined destination, her steps led her toward the stables, drawn by the soft neighing that broke the dawn's silence. She didn't expect to find Daniel there, not at that early hour. He stood in front of a circular corral, watching a magnificent black horse that moved restlessly, head high and ears back in clear sign of distrust. "Thunder," said Daniel upon sensing her presence without needing to turn to know it was her. "He's been here 3 weeks and still won't let anyone mount him." Isabella approached the fence cautiously, fascinated by the wild beauty of the animal. His coat gleamed like obsidian under the nascent light, and his eyes, amber-colored, seemed to contain fire. "He's beautiful," she murmured. And as if he had heard the compliment, Thunder turned toward her, studying her with an almost human intensity. "And he knows it," responded Daniel with a hint of humor in his normally serious voice. "Beauty without trust is dangerous, both in horses and in people." The observation, apparently casual, touched something deep in Isabella. She too was beautiful. She had been told so enough times to know it. And like Thunder, she had learned to keep everyone at a distance, protecting a heart too wounded to risk again. "How do you win his trust?" she asked, referring to the horse but thinking of herself. Daniel looked at her then, really looked at her, as if he could see through the layers of protection she had built over the years, with patience, consistency. "Showing him that not everyone who approaches wants to hurt him," he responded, and his words floated between them like a shared truth. "Would you like to try?" Before she could answer, Daniel took her hand and gave her a red apple. The contact, brief but electrifying, left her momentarily speechless. His fingers, rough but surprisingly gentle, sent a shiver up her arm. "Approach slowly. Don't look directly into his eyes. It's a challenge for them. Let him get used to your scent, your presence." Following his instructions, Isabella approached Thunder with measured steps. The horse snorted, nervous, but didn't retreat. She kept her hand extended with the apple, without forcing the encounter, allowing the animal to decide. Long minutes passed in this silent dance of wills. Finally, Thunder advanced, cautious, and took the offering with velvety lips that barely brushed her palm. Isabella held her breath, feeling she had just participated in something sacred. "Well done," said Daniel, and though his face remained a mask of control, his eyes revealed a new warmth. "You have a gift." From that day forward, Isabella's mornings acquired a new purpose. Before the house awakened, she headed to the stables to spend time with Thunder. Slowly, day by day, the space between them diminished. From the apple offered at a distance, they progressed to first contact, her hand on the velvety muzzle, then caressing the powerful neck, finally brushing the shining coat while the animal remained calm under her touch. Daniel observed this evolution with a mixture of admiration and something deeper he didn't dare name. Sometimes he offered advice, taught her the points where horses like to be caressed, showed her how to interpret the language of their ears and tail. In those shared mornings, among the aroma of fresh hay and leather, a silent complicity was woven between them. They didn't need many words. A gesture, a glance was enough to communicate. Isabella discovered that Daniel, beneath his taciturn exterior, possessed a gentleness that few came to know, and he in turn began to glimpse the strength that hid behind her apparent fragility. One morning, after weeks of patient work, Daniel offered her a saddle. "He's ready," he said simply. "And so are you," Isabella's heart raced. Riding Thunder would be the culmination of a process that went far beyond taming a horse. It meant trusting and being worthy of trust. With Daniel's guidance, she placed the saddle on the animal's back, which remained surprisingly calm. Then, with a fluid movement she had mentally practiced hundreds of times, she hoisted herself onto the saddle. There was a moment of tension when Thunder seemed to reconsider his decision. His muscles tensed beneath her, and Isabella held her breath. But then, as if reaching a silent agreement, the horse relaxed and accepted her weight. The triumph that flooded her was indescribable. She looked at Daniel, unable to contain the smile that illuminated her usually serious face. "We did it," she said, including him in her victory. Daniel nodded, and for the first time since she had known him, he smiled fully. It was like seeing the sun emerge after a long night, transforming everything it touched. "You did it, Isabella," he responded, and the sound of her name on his lips was like an unexpected caress. "Only you." While riding for the first time, feeling Thunder's power and confidence beneath her, Isabella understood she was learning a new language, not just that of horses, but also that of the heart which, after years of silence, was beginning to remember how to speak. May arrived dressed in colors and aromas, transforming Willowbrook into a vibrant canvas after the grey months of winter. The Spring Festival was the year's most important celebration for the small town, a time when even the faces most weathered by hardships softened with the promise of new beginnings. Nathan Morrison, against all odds, decided to participate in the festivities. He hadn't set foot in town since Victoria's death, and his announcement surprised both Isabella and the ranch workers. "You'll need an appropriate dress," he told her. One morning, with that brusqueness she had learned to interpret as his way of showing consideration, Victoria had several. "You can alter one for yourself." The mention of the late Mrs. Morrison no longer generated that uncomfortable silence of the first days. Nathan had begun to speak of her occasionally, small fragments of memories he shared. Like someone giving away long-kept treasures, the way Victoria sang while cutting flowers for the table, her stubbornness in learning Spanish from the Mexican cowboys, her crystalline laugh that seemed out of place in the house's severity. That afternoon, Isabella went up to the attic where the trunks with Victoria's belongings were stored. The space smelled of old wood and dried lavender, an aroma she had come to associate with secrets and memories. Among the carefully folded dresses, she found one of pale green muslin, with a simple but elegant cut, that would complement her figure without drawing too much attention. While extending it over the bed to examine it, she noticed that one of the side seams was undone, revealing a small hidden pocket. Intrigued, she slipped her fingers into the gap and extracted a folded piece of paper. It was a letter, yellowed. By time, written in elegant handwriting that curved like vines over the paper. "My dear Victoria, there's no day I don't think of her. Sometimes I see her in my dreams with your eyes and my stubborn smile. Did she inherit your voice, my love for horses? I'll never know, and that's the price I must pay for my cowardice. Take care of Nathan. He doesn't deserve to bear my mistakes, but he's a good man who truly loves you. More than I deserve to be loved. Always yours, Goaz. Raja." Isabella's hands trembled when she finished reading. Who was R, and who was her, the girl mentioned in the letter? An unsettling premonition settled in her chest, connecting dots that until then had remained isolated. The photograph of Rebecca Stone, Nathan's strange interest in her from the first day, the resemblance he himself had noticed. She put the letter back in its place, deciding to keep this discovery to herself for the moment. There were too many unanswered questions, and the festival wasn't the time to unearth ghosts that could alter the fragile balance they had achieved. The festival day dawned perfect, as if the sky itself had decided to honor the celebration. Isabella dressed carefully, adjusting Victoria's dress, which she had subtly modified to adapt to her figure. She gathered her hair in a low bun, letting some strands frame her face, and allowed herself a touch of color on her lips, a small act of rebellion against years of self-imposed austerity. When she descended the stairs, she found Nathan waiting in the vestibule, impeccable in his black suit and brocaded vest. Beside him, to her surprise, stood Daniel, transformed by formal attire that accentuated the breadth of his shoulders and the natural elegance of his posture. Their gazes met, and something indefinable passed between them, a mutual recognition that went beyond words. "You're beautiful, child," said Nathan, with unusual softness in his voice. Victoria would be proud. The journey to town was marked by comfortable silence, occasionally interrupted by Nathan's comments about past festivals. Isabella, seated next to Daniel in the back of the carriage, was painfully aware of every point where their bodies touched when the vehicle took a curve or encountered a bump. Willowbrook had transformed for the occasion. The streets, normally dusty and austere, were decorated with garlands of wildflowers and paper lanterns that swayed with the breeze. In the central square, long tables arranged under the centennial oaks offered a community feast where each family had contributed their best dishes. The arrival of the Morrisons, for that's how Nathan presented them, including her in a gesture that took her by surprise, caused a small stir. It had been so long since the old rancher participated in social events that his presence was almost a historical event. As the afternoon progressed, Isabella began to relax. The music of violins and guitars filled the air, mixing with laughter and conversations. She observed the town's women in their best finery, dancing with abandon in their husbands' arms. Children ran between tables, chasing each other in improvised games, their shrill laughter rising like notes of a joyful melody. It was during one of these moments of observation when she felt a presence at her side. Daniel had approached without her noticing, offering her a glass of punch with an almost shy gesture. "You haven't danced," he said. an observation more than a question. Isabella took the glass, grateful for the liquid's coolness in her suddenly dry throat. "I don't know how to dance," she confessed, and the admission was surprisingly liberating. "My father considered dancing an unnecessary frivolity." Daniel considered this for a moment, his eyes fixed on the improvised dance floor where couples spun to the rhythm of a slow waltz. "Would you like to learn?" he finally asked, extending his hand toward her in a silent invitation. Isabella's heart skipped a beat. She wanted to accept, yearned for the opportunity to feel his hands guiding her, but the fear of making a fool of herself, of exposing herself to the town's curious gazes, paralyzed her. As if reading her mind, Daniel added, "Not here. There's a quieter place." He led her away from the square's bustle toward a small clearing surrounded by trees where lanterns hung like low stars, and the music arrived softened by distance. There, under the canopy of leaves that filtered the sunset's golden light, he placed a hand on her waist with delicacy, taking hers with the other. "Follow my steps," he murmured, and began moving slowly, guiding her gently. At first, Isabella felt clumsy and rigid, too conscious of every movement. But gradually, as her body synchronized with Daniel's, she discovered that dancing was like a language, not so different from what she had learned with Thunder. It was a matter of trust, of surrendering to the shared rhythm, of allowing another to guide her without fear of falling. "You're doing well," he assured her, and his voice, so close to her ear, sent chills down her spine. They danced thus in their private world, while the sun sank into the horizon and the first stars appeared in the Texas sky. They didn't notice the knowing glances exchanged by the few who passed nearby, nor Nathan Morrison's knowing smile, who watched them from the distance with a mixture of satisfaction and melancholy. When they finally stopped, breathless and with flushed cheeks, Isabella surprised herself by laughing openly, a sound she had forgotten she could produce. "Thank you," she said, and in that simple word she poured gratitude that went far beyond the dance lesson. Daniel didn't respond with words. Instead, he brought Isabella's hand to his lips and deposited a kiss light as a feather on her knuckles. An ancient, chivalrous gesture that spoke of respect and admiration, but also of a deeper feeling that both were beginning to recognize. That night, while they returned to the ranch under a blanket of stars, Isabella felt that something fundamental had changed within her. A seed planted during the storm that had brought them together was beginning to bloom, as delicate and promising as spring's first shoots. June brought with it a burning heat that fell upon the earth like a heavy blanket. The days stretched out, lazy and bright, while life at the Morrison Ranch followed its course with the constancy of the seasons. Isabella had found a rhythm, a routine that provided her with a comfort she had never known. Mornings with Thunder, who now responded to her call with a whinny of recognition. Afternoons helping Nathan with ranch administration, learning about crops and livestock. Evenings on the gallery listening to the field sounds while her fingers created small masterpieces with needle and thread. And Daniel. Daniel was a constant presence, a silent but firm pillar that supported this new life she was building. He hadn't taken her in his arms again since the dance at the festival, but his gazes, his small gestures of consideration, the stolen moments of conversation under the setting sun, all of it wove between them a growing intimacy that neither dared to name. It was during one of those suffocating afternoons when Nathan asked her to look for some old documents in the attic. The task led her to explore corners of the house she didn't. Tight spaces where dust accumulated over objects forgotten by time. In one corner of the attic, partially hidden under a yellowed sheet, she discovered a leather trunk with engraved initials, R.S. Rebecca Stone. Her heart skipped a beat, recognizing the name that had begun to haunt her like a ghost. The lock was rusty but not blocked. With trembling hands, Isabella lifted the lid, knowing she was crossing a line, invading a past that perhaps should remain buried. The aroma of dried lavender and old paper emerged like a sigh from within. The trunk contained the remains of a life, carefully folded dresses, an ivory fan with hand-painted flower designs, lace gloves that crumbled at touch, and letters, dozens of them tied with faded ribbons. With her heart beating in her ears, Isabella took one of the packages. The letters were addressed to Rebecca Stone, sent from Boston, dated 40 years ago. The handwriting was elegant, clearly feminine, and the signature at the end of each page was simply V. Isabella read one after another, reconstructing fragments of a story that seemed like a distorted mirror of her own. V was Victoria Ashford, then a young woman from good family engaged to a man she didn't love. Rebecca was her companion, her confidant, and according to the letters, much more than that. My dear Rebecca, the days without you are a desert. Mother insists that marriage to James will bring stability to our family. But what is stability worth if the heart withers in a golden cage? Sometimes I dream of fleeing west, where they say the land is so vast that one can lose oneself and find oneself at the same time. Would you follow me, my brave R? Would you leave everything for an uncertain but authentic life by my side? Fayasu, the last letter in the package, dated 6 months later, revealed an unexpected turn. Rebecca, my love, the scandal has erupted. Mother found your last letter and threatens to expose us if I don't accept marriage to James. I can't bear the idea of you suffering public scorn because of me. And there's something else, something that changes everything. I'm expecting a child that cannot be James's, for I've never allowed him the liberties that society assumes. A child that is the fruit of love, not convenience. If there's a possibility you might forgive me someday, find me in Boston, at my Aunt Cordelia's house. There I'll wait with our little miracle until the world is kinder to women like us. With all my heart, Victoria. Isabella's hands trembled when she dropped the letter. The puzzle pieces were beginning to fit together, forming an image that left her breathless. The girl mentioned in the letter, hidden in Victoria's dress, the mysterious R. Nathan's interest in her from the first moment. A sound on the stairs startled her. Quickly she put the letters back in the trunk and covered it with the sheet, just as Nathan's heavy footsteps reached the attic. "Did you find the documents, child?" he asked, his narrowed eyes adapting to the gloom. "Not yet, Mr. Morrison," she responded, struggling to keep her voice steady. "There are many boxes to review." Nathan nodded distractedly, his gaze wandering through the cluttered space until it stopped at the corner where the covered trunk was located. A flash of recognition, followed by a shadow of pain, crossed his face. "Leave that for tomorrow," he said brusquely. "Daniel has brought a new colt he wants to show you." Isabella thanked the excuse to escape from that space charged with secrets. While following Nathan downstairs, her mind buzzed with questions and possibilities. Was it possible that Victoria Ashford, the woman from the letters, was her biological mother? And who then was Rebecca Stone? Why did Nathan guard her belongings with such zeal? Daniel waited for her in the corrals, his figure silhouetted against the setting sun that tinted the sky orange and purple. Upon seeing her, something in his expression changed, as if he could read the turbulence within her. "Are you all right?" he asked in a low voice when Nathan walked away. Isabella wanted to tell him everything, share the weight of her discovery, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead of answering, she approached the newly arrived colt, a chestnut with long legs and curious eyes that observed her without fear. "He's beautiful," she said, caressing the silky neck of the animal. "What's his name?" "He doesn't have a name yet," Daniel responded, allowing her to evade his question. "I thought you could choose it." The simple act of trust, of including her in something that was clearly important to him, almost broke her composure. The day's emotions, the discovered secrets, the possibility of a different past than she had always believed, all accumulated in her chest like a storm about to break. "Dawn," she finally said, thinking of new beginnings and revealed truths. "His name is Dawn." Daniel nodded as if the name were perfectly appropriate. His hand found hers on the colt's neck, a brief but electrifying contact. "Something has changed," he observed, not a question but a statement. "When you're ready to talk, I'll be here to listen." The simple promise, offered without pressure or expectations, was like a balm for her agitated spirit. While the sun disappeared on the horizon, tinting the sky an intense red that promised another day of suffocating heat, Isabella felt a certainty form within her. Whatever the truth about her past, her future was here on this land. With these people who, against all odds, had become her refuge, July arrived implacable, bringing with it a drought that wiped out spring's promises. The sky, an almost painful blue in its perfection, stretched over the earth like mockery. denying the rain that fields and livestock desperately clamored for. The days became a constant struggle against thirst. The ranch workers dug deeper, searching for water, while the level of the stream that fed Morrison lands descended dangerously. The cattle, once lustrous and robust, began showing ribs under dried hides. The horses drank rationally, their eyes dim with fatigue. Isabella watched concern grow on Nathan's face, who spent long hours studying old property maps, searching for forgotten water sources. One afternoon, she found him asleep over his desk, his face marked by fatigue lines that seemed to have deepened in a matter of weeks. Gently she placed a blanket over his shoulders, noting with alarm how fragile he seemed, stripped of his usual aura of authority. Daniel also suffered the drought's effects. His responsibilities had multiplied, bringing hay from distant properties, ensuring animals drank enough to survive, but not so much as to exhaust reserves, helping dig wells that turned out too dry, or with water too brackish to be useful. Despite exhaustion, he continued finding time for Isabella. Small moments stolen from work, a shared cup of coffee at dawn, a short walk under moonlight, a horseback ride in the scarce minutes of coolness that twilight brought. It was during one of these nightly walks when Daniel finally spoke of what everyone feared but no one dared mention. If the drought continues, Nathan will have to sell part of the livestock, he said, his low voice mixing with the cricket's song. Maybe even consider selling the ranch. The news, though expected, fell on Isabella like a physical weight. In the months she had been there, the Morrison Ranch had become her home, a refuge from the world she had never known before. The idea of losing it, of seeing Nathan stripped of his legacy and Daniel without the land he loved, was unbearable. There must be something we can do, she said, stopping to look at Daniel directly. Moonlight silvered his features, softening the hardness that sun and worry had carved on his face. I have some savings from my work in town. It's not much, but... Daniel shook his head, moved by her offer but aware of its futility against the problem's magnitude. We'd need a small fortune, Isabella. Or a miracle. They remained in silence, contemplating the horizon, where stars seemed to mock with their distant, indifferent brilliance. Suddenly, an idea began forming in Isabella's mind. Her embroideries, always appreciated for their beauty and detail, had begun generating regular commissions from town women. But what if she could take her work further, to a broader audience? The county fair, she said, words tumbling out as the plan took shape. It's in 2 weeks. I could prepare special pieces, not just handkerchiefs and tablecloths, but something more ambitious. A tapestry that tells the story of the West, something that attracts visitors from the city. Daniel looked at her with a mixture of admiration and doubt. It's a brave idea, but do you think it will be enough? I don't know, she admitted, the raw honesty in her voice. But I have to try. For Nathan, for you, for everything you've done for me. That night, while Daniel accompanied her back to the house under a star-studded sky, Isabella felt a new determination take root within her. Since her arrival, she had received so much: a home, a purpose, the possibility of belonging. Now it was her turn to give something back, to fight for this place and these people who had become her family. The following 2 weeks were a whirlwind of frantic activity. Isabella worked day and night, her fingers moving tirelessly over fabrics of various colors and textures. She created scenes of the West she now knew, dramatic sunsets over golden prairies, wild horses galloping free, the silent dignity of cowboys facing the elements. Her centerpiece was an ambitious tapestry, a panorama of the Morrison Ranch seen from the hill, with the big house rising proudly under a sky where storm clouds promised the drought's end. In each stitch she poured not only her skill but also her hope, her love for this land and its people. The fair day arrived with an unusually cool breeze, as if the weather wanted to offer brief respite to the punished earth. Daniel helped her set up the small stall, his strong, sure hands placing the pieces with care that revealed how much he understood what they meant to her. The response exceeded all her expectations. Visitors from neighboring towns and even distant San Antonio stopped amazed before her creations. The smaller pieces sold quickly, at prices that surprised her. By mid-afternoon, only the large tapestry remained, which she had decided not to sell unless she received an extraordinary offer. It was then when an elegant woman, with a city bearing and sharp eyes that evaluated everything around her, stopped in front of her stall. She observed the tapestry for a long time, her gloved fingers lightly brushing the surface with reverence. "It's extraordinary," she finally said, with an accent that betrayed refined education. "Who is the artist?" "I am," responded Isabella, feeling strangely vulnerable under this stranger's scrutiny. The woman looked at her then, really looked at her, with an intensity that was almost physical. "Victoria Ashford," she introduced herself, extending a gloved hand. "I have a gallery in Boston. I'd like to talk about the possibility of exhibiting your work there." The name fell on Isabella like lightning in clear sky. Victoria Ashford, the same Victoria from the letters, the woman who possibly was her biological mother. Was such coincidence possible? Or did destiny, as Daniel often suggested, have mysterious ways of closing circles? With her heart beating violently in her chest, Isabella shook the offered hand. The contact, brief but charged with meaning only she understood, left her momentarily speechless. It would be an honor. "Mrs. Ashford," she managed to say finally, her voice barely a whisper. While the elegant woman wrote an address on a card she gave her, Isabella searched her face for some sign of recognition, some signal that she might feel the connection that possibly united them. But Victoria's eyes, though kind, remained opaque to any revelation. That night, while counting the day's earnings, enough to buy the hay needed to maintain livestock for a few more weeks, Isabella held the card like a talisman. Boston. The city where, according to the letters, Victoria had waited with their little miracle. Should she speak? Reveal what she knew, ask directly? Or was the past better left to rest, allowing destiny's threads to weave at their own pace? With these thoughts swirling in her mind, Isabella didn't notice the figure approaching silently from the porch shadows. "You've done something extraordinary today," said Daniel, startling her. "Nathan is, well, he won't say it, but he's deeply moved." He sat beside her on the steps, so close she could feel the warmth of his body, a silent comfort in the cool night. "It's not enough," she responded, frustration tinting her voice. "It will buy time, but it won't solve the problem." Daniel then took her hand, a gesture so natural and yet so significant that it stole her breath. "Sometimes, Isabella, courage isn't in solving all problems, but in refusing to surrender to them," he said, his eyes seeking hers in the gloom. "Today you showed more courage than any of us." The sincerity in his voice, the warmth of his hand holding hers, the scent of earth that always seemed to accompany him, all of it brought down Isabella's last defenses. Without thinking, she leaned toward him, resting her head on his shoulder in a gesture of absolute trust. Daniel remained still for an instant, as if fearing to break the moment's magic with any movement. Then slowly, he passed an arm around her shoulders, drawing her toward him in an embrace that contained all the words they still didn't dare pronounce. Thus they remained, in silence under the starry sky, united not only by the shared challenge of saving the ranch, but by something deeper and more fragile that was beginning to bloom between them. Like an unexpected sprout in the middle of earth dried by drought, August brought with it a suffocating heat that seemed to suck life itself from the earth. The drought, far from yielding, intensified, turning fields into a cracked canvas of ochre and grey tones. The cattle lowed pitifully, with glassy eyes and prominent ribs under dulled hides. The wells, dug with growing desperation, offered barely a thread of murky water, insufficient for the ranch's needs. Nathan Morrison spent hours locked in his study, reviewing accounts and increasingly grim possibilities. The money obtained by Isabella at the fair had been temporary relief, but reality was implacable. Without rain, the ranch wouldn't survive winter. Daniel, always the silent pillar, worked from dawn until well into the night, seeking solutions where there seemed to be none. Isabella watched him return each day more exhausted, with new lines of worry marking his bronzed face. It was in the midst of this atmosphere of despair when the letter arrived. The messenger, a young man covered in road dust, delivered it directly to Isabella, who was on the porch embroidering under the scarce shade. The envelope, of thick, creamy paper, bore the letterhead of a prestigious fashion house from San Antonio. Inside, an offer that took her breath away. They wanted to buy her embroidery designs for an exclusive collection, offering a sum that could keep the ranch afloat for months. The news should have filled her with joy, but one detail overshadowed her initial reaction. The work required her presence in San Antonio for at least 3 months. 3 months away from the ranch, from Nathan. From Daniel. That afternoon, when she shared the news with Nathan, the old man observed her with a mixture of pride and resigned sadness. "You should accept," he said after a long silence. "It's an opportunity that not many young women receive." "But the ranch," she began, guilt knotting in her throat. Nathan made a dismissive gesture with his hand, an attempt to minimize the situation that failed to fool either of them. "This land has survived Indians, bandits and worse droughts," he stated, though doubt filtered into his tired voice. "It will survive this one, too." Isabella knew he was lying, but she also understood the pride that prevented him from openly accepting that he needed her help. The dilemma tormented her for days. At nights, she lay awake contemplating her room's ceiling, weighing options, seeking a solution that didn't involve abandoning the place and people who had become her home. It wasn't until a week later that she found Daniel in the stables, brushing Thunder with mechanical movements, his mind clearly elsewhere. The horse, sensitive to his caretaker's mood, showed restless snorting and shifting weight from one foot to another. "You should go," said Daniel without turning, as if he had sensed her presence. "Nathan won't admit it, but we're on the edge of the abyss. Your opportunity in San Antonio could be what saves us all." The frankness of his words disarmed her. She approached slowly, positioning herself in front of him to force him to look at her. "I don't want to leave you," she said, the words escaping before she could contain them. Daniel stopped the brush mid-movement. His eyes, usually reserved, revealed for an instant a vulnerability that moved her deeply. "And I don't want you to go," he responded, his voice hoarse with contained emotion. "But more than that, I don't want to be the reason you sacrifice your future." The raw honesty of his confession brought down the last barriers between them. Without thinking, Isabella stepped forward and rested her forehead against Daniel's chest, inhaling his scent of leather, earth, and something indefinably his. She felt his arms surround her, strong and protective. And for a moment the outside world, the drought, the worries, the pending decisions, faded, leaving only this shared refuge. "Write to me every week," he murmured against her hair. "And come back when you've finished. We'll be waiting for you." The promise, simple but charged with meaning, sealed her decision. She would leave for San Antonio, work until exhaustion if necessary, and return with the means to save the ranch that had become her home, and the man who, without grandiose words or dramatic gestures, had been occupying an ever larger space in her heart. The morning of her departure dawned with an almost supernatural stillness. The sky, an intense and clear blue, seemed to mock the thirsty earth. Nathan said goodbye with a brief but heartfelt embrace, slipping a small object wrapped in a handkerchief into her hand. "So you remember where you come from," he said, with unusual emotion in his habitually controlled voice. Upon unwrapping it, Isabella discovered an antique cameo. Inside, the miniature of a young woman with an astonishing resemblance to herself, Rebecca Stone. The gift, more revealing than any verbal confession, confirmed what she had begun to suspect, that the threads of her past were inexorably interwoven with this land and these people. Daniel accompanied her to the station, driving the carriage in a silence charged with unexpressed emotions. Upon saying goodbye, he gave her a small leather pouch. "It's earth from the ranch," he explained, shyness softening his normally austere features. "So you have a piece of here with you." The gesture, so simple and yet so deeply significant, almost broke her composure. Without caring about the curious glances of the few travelers waiting for the train, Isabella stood on tiptoes and deposited a soft kiss at the corner of his lips, a silent promise of what could be upon her return. While the train pulled away, taking her toward San Antonio and an uncertain future, Isabella contemplated through the window Daniel's solitary figure, motionless on the platform, until distance made him barely visible. She pressed against her chest the pouch of earth and the cameo, talismans of an unfinished story, and allowed herself, for the first time since her arrival in Willowbrook, to cry openly for what she was leaving behind. She didn't know then that destiny, with its peculiar sense of timing and opportunity, had prepared a surprise that would forever alter the course of her life. San Antonio buzzed with a vitality that painfully contrasted with Willowbrook's agonizing stillness. The cobblestone streets overflowed with activity. Elegant carriages shared space with merchandise carts, while ladies with lace parasols strolled arm in arm with impeccably dressed gentlemen. The city was a feast for the senses. the aroma of fresh-baked bread mixed with the perfume of jasmines growing in interior patios, and the music of Spanish guitars floated in the hot afternoon air. Isabella settled in a small boarding house near the workshop where she would work. Her room, though modest, offered a window overlooking an interior garden where a singing fountain seemed to mock the drought punishing the countryside. Each night, after long days bent over precious fabrics, she wrote extensive letters to Daniel and Nathan, pouring into them not only her work's novelties, but also the growing nostalgia for the life she had left behind. The responses arrived regularly, bringing with them the aroma of earth and horses she already associated with home. Daniel, sparing with words even in writing, managed to transmit between laconic lines everything he didn't dare express directly. Nathan, surprisingly, had become more communicative in her absence, sharing anecdotes from his youth that gradually revealed the story Isabella yearned to know. It was during the third week of her stay in San Antonio when she received the visit that would change everything. She was working on a particularly complex embroidery when the workshop owner approached, accompanied by an elegant figure Isabella immediately recognized, Victoria Ashford. "Mrs. Ashford has come expressly from Boston to meet our star artist," announced the owner, not hiding her pride at the distinction. Victoria, impeccable in a mauve traveling suit, observed Isabella's work with expert eyes. "Each stitch tells a story," she said, her cultured voice caressing each syllable. "I'd like to speak privately with Miss Harper, if possible." An hour later, seated in a discreet corner of a nearby cafe, Isabella faced the conversation she had imagined countless times since her discovery in the Morrison Ranch attic. "I don't know how to begin," said Victoria, an unexpected vulnerability showing behind her composed facade. "I've rehearsed this moment for so many years. Are you my mother?" asked Isabella directly, unable to bear more circumlocution. The question, simple and brutal in its frankness, seemed to crumble Victoria's last defenses. Her eyes, the same intense green as Isabella's, filled with contained tears. "Yes," she responded with a thread of voice. "I searched for you for years, but when I finally gathered the courage to return to Texas, they told me Rebecca had died and that you had been adopted by a family from Austin. I never knew your married name nor where to find you." The confirmation, though expected, fell on Isabella like a physical weight. For years she had built her identity around rejection, convinced she wasn't worthy of true love. Discovering she had been sought, longed for, fundamentally changed her life's narrative. "And Rebecca?" she asked, needing to complete the story. Victoria took a sip of tea, as if seeking strength in the hot liquid. "I loved her more than I've loved anyone in my life," she confessed, with an honesty that could only be born from decades of reflection. "When I became pregnant, my family threatened to destroy her socially if I didn't marry James Ashford. I accepted to protect her, with the promise that we would reunite after you were born." She paused, lost in painful memories. "But Rebecca was proud. She felt betrayed by my marriage, even though it was a farce. She went to Texas, where she had a small property inherited from an uncle. When I finally managed to free myself from my marriage and took you with me to find her, we found her ill under Nathan Morrison's care." "Nathan," murmured Isabella, the pieces finally fitting together. "He had always loved her, though it was never reciprocated. He cared for her in her last days, with a devotion that made me understand that true love doesn't always require reciprocity." Victoria extended a trembling hand over the table, barely brushing Isabella's fingers. "Rebecca made me promise to leave you with the Harpers, a couple from Austin who couldn't have children. She thought you'd have a better life with them than with a single woman marked by scandal. I've respected that promise for 28 years, though it's been the greatest sacrifice of my life." Isabella contemplated this elegant woman, marked by time and pain, and saw in her not only the mother she never knew, but also a reflection of herself. The same reserve, the same tendency to hide vulnerabilities under a layer of determination. "How did you find me now?" she asked, though part of her already intuited the answer. "It wasn't coincidence that I was at the county fair," Victoria admitted. "I received a letter from Nathan a few months ago. Apparently he always knew where you were, but respected Rebecca's wishes until he saw you arrive at his door, as if destiny had decided to close the circle." The silence that followed this revelation was charged with contradictory emotions: resentment for the lost years, gratitude for the truths finally revealed, and a strange sense of belonging that Isabella had never experienced before. "I have a proposal for you," Victoria finally said. "Rebecca's property, the lands adjoining the Morrison Ranch, are legally yours. They were never sold. They've simply been waiting for their rightful owner to claim them." Isabella looked at her, perplexed. "I have lands next to the Morrison Ranch?" "Lands with an underground spring that could save the entire region from drought," Victoria confirmed. "Nathan knows it. It's part of the reason he took you in. Those waters have been a source of dispute between the Stones and the Morrisons for generations. Now it's in your hands to decide how to use that legacy." The revelation was overwhelming. Not only had she found her roots, her true story, but she also possessed the key to saving the home she had come to love. That night, while hastily packing her belongings to return to Willowbrook, Isabella understood that the tapestry of her life, which for so long had seemed like a collection of loose threads and disconnected patterns, was finally beginning to reveal a coherent and beautiful design in its complexity. With her heart divided between the excitement of reuniting with Daniel and Nathan and the sadness of separating again from the mother she had just found, Isabella boarded the return train, this time not as a desperate employee trying to help, but as a woman with the power to change the destiny of everyone she loved. The landscape that rolled by the window seemed different now, illuminated by new understanding. The same dry hills, the same waterless streams, but seen through eyes that had learned that even in the most arid land, unexpected springs can emerge, if one knows where and how to look. The train advanced with a hypnotic rhythm through the parched land, each turn of its wheels bringing Isabella closer to the moment she simultaneously yearned for and feared. The afternoon fell over the Texas prairies, tinting the horizon an intense orange that merged with the dust raised by the wind, creating a dreamlike, almost unreal atmosphere. In her lap rested the folder with the documents Victoria had given her, property deeds, ancient maps showing the exact location of the underground spring, personal letters Rebecca had left for her, anticipating a moment that never came to pass. The weight of these papers was much greater than their physical substance. They represented not only a material legacy, but also the responsibility of decisions that would affect many lives. Willowbrook Station finally appeared, a modest weathered wooden building that had never seemed so welcoming. Isabella descended with her heart racing wildly, instinctively searching among the few present for Daniel's familiar figure. He wasn't there. A pang of disappointment shot through her, quickly followed by woe. Had the ranch's situation worsened during her absence? Daniel's letters, though regular, had been increasingly brief and contained, as if he were trying to shield her from bad news. With her small suitcase in one hand and the folder firmly held under her arm, she set out on the path to Sarah's Inn, where she planned to spend the night before heading to the Morrison Ranch the next day. The town seemed drowsy under the persistent heat, with few people on the streets, and a silence only occasionally broken by a dog's distant bark. It was when turning the corner leading to the inn that she saw her. Not Daniel, but a young, elegant woman with golden hair gathered under a wide-brimmed hat, who conversed animatedly with the town blacksmith. Something in her posture, in the familiarity with which she moved in this environment, indicated she wasn't a simple visitor. Isabella continued her way, intrigued but focused on her objective, when the stranger's crystalline laugh stopped her dead. A laugh she had heard before in another life, during the scarce social gatherings she attended in her youth. "Charlotte?" she asked, turning toward the woman with incredulity. Charlotte Sinclair, the daughter of Austin's most important banker, turned upon hearing her name. Recognition illuminated her perfect face, immediately followed by an expression of barely concealed calculation. "Isabella Harper!" she exclaimed, advancing toward her with arms extended in a gesture of false affection. "What a surprise to find you in this deep place." The disdain in her last word was barely perceptible, but Isabella caught it clearly. It had always been like that with Charlotte. Sweetness on the surface, poison just beneath. "What are you doing in Willowbrook?" Isabella asked directly. Too tired for social games, Charlotte waved a jeweled hand as if shooing away an invisible fly. "Oh, family business. Papa is interested in acquiring properties affected by the drought," she responded lightly. "But I'm staying for more personal reasons." Something in her tone lit an alarm inside Isabella. Personal? Daniel Crawford, said Charlotte, visibly savoring the effect the name produced on Isabella. We were engaged, you know. Years ago, before he decided he preferred horses' company to mine. But now, let's say we're reconnecting. Each word was like a precise dagger, aimed at Isabella's heart's most vulnerable points. Daniel had never mentioned a previous engagement, though he had no obligation to do so. But reconnecting? What exactly did that mean? I wish you luck then, she said, managing to keep her voice steady despite the knot forming in her throat. If you'll excuse me, I have matters to attend to. She walked away with measured steps, conscious of Charlotte's satisfied gaze nailed to her back. Only when she was out of sight did she allow her composure to crack, leaning against an alley wall while struggling to control the wave of jealousy and doubts that threatened to drown her. Had she misinterpreted everything? The moments shared with Daniel, the gazes, the dance under the stars, the implicit promise in their farewell? Perhaps for him they didn't mean the same as for her. Perhaps Charlotte, with her conventional beauty and wealth, represented what he had always truly desired. With this fresh wound throbbing inside her, she arrived at the inn where Sarah received her with a genuine embrace that almost broke her last defenses. Daniel has been coming every day to ask if there was news of you, said the innkeeper, while helping her settle in. That man may not say much, but his eyes speak volumes when he mentions your name. The words, though comforting, didn't completely dispel the shadow Charlotte's encounter had cast over her return. That night, lying in the narrow bed that now seemed strange after weeks of absence, Isabella contemplated the ceiling with open eyes, weighing Victoria's revelations, Charlotte's unsettling presence, and the decision she had to make about the lands and spring that could save the Morrison ranch. Dawn found her exhausted, but determined. She dressed carefully, choosing one of the new dresses she had acquired in San Antonio, a deep blue that highlighted the green of her eyes and the slenderness of her figure. It wasn't about vanity, but armor. She needed all possible confidence to face what awaited her. She had begun to descend the stairs when the inn's door burst open. Daniel entered like a contained storm, his hat in one hand and the other closed in a tense fist. Upon seeing her, he stopped abruptly, as if he had crashed into an invisible wall. Isabella, he said, her name a prayer and an affirmation on his lips. They looked at each other in silence, the space between them charged with unspoken words. Isabella noticed the changes in him, thinner with new tension lines around his eyes, but with the same solid presence she had learned to associate with security. I've returned, she said, slowly descending the last steps. Earlier than expected, Daniel took a step toward her, then another, until only a few centimeters separated them. The familiar aroma of leather and clean earth enveloped her, awakening memories of moments shared under starry skies. Charlotte is here, she continued, needing to directly address what tormented her. She told me you two were reconnecting. A shadow crossed Daniel's face, followed by an expression she had never seen on him. Pure, contained fury. Charlotte says many things, most of them far from truth, he responded, his voice a low growl. She came to the ranch 2 weeks ago, offering her father's generous help to buy the lands at a price Nathan called insulting. When we refused, she changed tactics. He paused, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. She tried to remind me of what once existed between us. An engagement I broke when I discovered she saw me as a project, a cowboy she could turn into a parlor gentleman. The raw honesty in his words dispelled part of the tension Isabella had accumulated. Daniel had never been a man of elaborate explanations or justifications. That he offered this now without her asking meant more than any grandiose declaration. I have something to show you, she said, pointing to the folder resting on the table, something that could change everything. During the next hour, she explained her discovery, her true identity as daughter of Victoria Ashford and Rebecca Stone, the lands that now belonged to her, the underground spring that could save not only the Morrison Ranch, but the entire region. Daniel listened without interrupting, his dark eyes following every expression on her face, with an intensity that made words unnecessary. When she finished, he remained silent for a long time, processing the implications of what he had just heard. I always knew there was something special about you, he finally said, with a slight smile that transformed his usually serious face. Since that night in the barn during the storm, He extended a hand over the table, palm up, a silent invitation. Isabella placed hers over it, their fingers intertwining naturally, like pieces of a puzzle that finally find their place. "Nathan must know this," continued Daniel. "He's been waiting for you to return, though he doesn't imagine with what news." "Do you think he always knew who I was?" asked Isabella, still processing the situation's complexity. "Nathan Morrison rarely does anything without a purpose," responded Daniel, a note of admiration in his voice. "If he brought you to the ranch, if he sent me to find you that first time, it was because he saw something the rest of us couldn't see." He stood up, still holding her hand, pulling gently for her to do the same. "Come with me," he said, an invitation that went far beyond the present moment. "It's time to go home." That simple phrase, "Go home," resonated inside Isabella with unexpected force. Home, not the cold mansion where she had grown up, nor the boarding house room in San Antonio, but the Morrison Ranch, with its wide galleries and spectacular sunsets, with Nathan and his half-told stories, with Daniel and his silent but constant presence. While gathering her belongings and preparing to leave, Isabella felt that the scattered threads of her life were finally beginning to weave into a coherent and beautiful pattern. A pattern that, against all odds, included this man of few words who waited for her patiently, as if he had all eternity to be by her side. The road to the Morrison Ranch had never seemed so long, nor so charged with meaning. The carriage advanced slowly over the parched earth, raising clouds of dust that swirled like ghosts under the merciless midday sun. Daniel drove in silence, his hands firm on the reins, while Isabella observed the familiar landscape with new eyes, conscious that part of this land, arid and apparently inhospitable, belonged to her by birthright. "The stone property begins just after that hill," said Daniel, pointing to a spot on the horizon. "The region's best grazing lands before the water dispute ruined everything." "What dispute?" asked Isabella, though part of her already intuited the answer. Daniel adjusted his hat, protecting his eyes from the merciless sun. Nathan's grandfather, William Morrison, and Rebecca's great-uncle, Joshua Stone, were partners and friends. They found the spring together, but disagreed on how to use it. William wanted to filled channels to distribute water equitably between both properties. Joshua insisted the water belonged exclusively to whoever owned the land where it sprouted. He paused, as if measuring how much to reveal. The dispute became bitter. Feuding families, stolen cattle, cut fences, the kind of enmity that poisons generations. "And Nathan and Rebecca?" asked Isabella, connecting points in the fragmented story she had been collecting. "They tried to break the cycle," responded Daniel, his voice softening. "They loved each other, or at least Nathan loved her. They planned to unite the properties through marriage, heal old wounds. But then Rebecca met Victoria Ashford during a trip to Boston. He left the sentence unfinished, but it wasn't necessary for him to continue. Isabella could complete the story. Rebecca found in Victoria a love that eclipsed any other feeling, leaving Nathan with a broken heart and decades of solitude ahead. The carriage finally crested the last hill, revealing the Morrison Ranch in all its austere beauty. The big house, with its white columns and wide galleries, seemed like a ship anchored in a sea of thirsty land. The stables and barns, arranged in a protective semicircle, showed evident signs of drought, dried wood cracking under the sun, roofs needing repair, empty corrals where cattle once grazed. Nathan waited on the porch, his figure erect despite age and worries, leaning on his walnut cane like a tireless sentinel. Upon seeing them approach, something in his posture changed, a barely perceptible tension that revealed the importance he attributed to this return. When the carriage stopped in front of the house, Isabella felt a knot in her throat. This proud old man, who had loved without being reciprocated, who had kept secrets for decades, but had also extended a hand when she most needed it, represented a link to her past she had never expected to find. "You've returned earlier than expected, child," said Nathan by way of greeting, his rough voice contrasting with the softness of his gaze. "I suppose that means you have news that couldn't wait." Isabella nodded, descending from the carriage with the document folder firmly held under her arm. "I met Victoria Ashford," she said simply, watching how the name provoked a flash of recognition in the old man's eyes. "My mother." Nathan remained motionless for an instant, like a statue carved in ancient stone. Then, with a gesture that surprised her by its vulnerability, he extended a hand toward her. "Come inside," he said. "This conversation has waited too long to have it under the sun." In the cool, dim study, with Daniel as silent witness, Isabella presented the documents that proved her identity and her right to the Stone lands. Nathan examined them with surprisingly firm hands, occasionally nodding as if confirming facts he already knew. "I always knew who you were," he finally confessed, lifting his gaze from the papers. "I recognized you the moment Daniel brought you here. You have Victoria's eyes and Rebecca's stubborn chin. Why didn't you say anything?" asked Isabella without reproach in her voice, only genuine curiosity. Nathan leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on a distant point, as if contemplating scenes from a past only he could see. "Rebecca made me promise I would never interfere in your life," he responded, "that I would let you find your own path, free from old disputes and buried secrets." A sad smile crossed his weathered face. "But destiny has its own sense of humor. Of all the doors you could have knocked on, you chose mine." "It wasn't coincidence," intervened Daniel, speaking for the first time since they entered the house. "The storm, the barn, it was as if something greater than us was in motion." Nathan nodded, conceding him the point. "And now," he said, returning his attention to Isabella, "the Stone heiress returns with the power to save or condemn the Morrisons. The irony doesn't escape me." Isabella felt the weight of the decision she had to make. The lands, the spring, were legally hers. She could sell them to the highest bidder, as Charlotte and her father clearly hoped, and secure her economic independence for life. She could use them exclusively for her benefit, perpetuating the old dispute. Or she could— "I want to unite the properties," she said, the words coming out with more firmness than she felt. "Not through a marriage, as you and Rebecca planned, but through an equitable partnership. Water for everyone, as it should have been from the beginning." A dense silence followed her declaration. Nathan observed her with a mixture of amazement and something deeper, almost reverential. Daniel, beside her, had visibly held his breath. "Rebecca would be proud," Nathan finally said, his voice breaking slightly on the last word. "You were always her greatest hope for redemption." That afternoon the three rode to the boundaries of both properties. The spring, according to ancient maps, was located at a point where Stone and Morrison lands met, as if nature itself had wanted to unite what men insisted on separating. Under Daniel's direction, several workers began digging at the indicated spot. The sun slowly descended toward the horizon when the shovels struck something different, not rock but damp earth. They continued excavating with renewed vigor until a sound none had heard in months filled the dry air, the murmur of flowing water, a small stream at first, barely a silver thread reflecting the sunset light. Then, as if the earth itself sighed with relief, the flow increased, creating a small pond at the base of the newly dug well. The men cheered, some even cried without shame. Daniel turned toward Isabella, his normally impassive face transformed by a smile that illuminated each of his features. "You've done it," he said, taking her hands in his, not caring who might see them. "You've saved the ranch. You've saved everyone." While observing the clear water spring from the earth, Isabella felt something also release within her, the fear of not being enough, of not deserving love, of always being searching for a place to belong. Like the spring that had remained hidden but never dried up, her capacity to love and be loved had always been there, waiting for the right moment and person to flow freely. That night, while news of the discovery spread through the region like fire in dry grass, Isabella remained on the ranch porch, contemplating the first stars appearing in the clear sky. Daniel joined her in silence, offering her a steaming cup of coffee. "Charlotte and her father left this afternoon," he commented, with a tone suggesting it was information that might interest her. Apparently lands without value for bargain price buying no longer attract them. Isabella smiled, grateful for the dry sense of humor she had learned to appreciate in him. "Do you regret that she left?" she asked, needing to hear the answer, though she already knew the truth in her heart. Daniel set his cup aside and turned toward her completely, his gaze more eloquent than any spoken word. "The only departure I would regret," he said in a deep voice, almost a whisper, "would be yours." "Isabella." Under the starry mantle of that Texas night, the words hung between them like a promise. Isabella felt something untie inside her, a knot that had remained tight for too long. "I have no intention of leaving," she responded, her voice firm despite her heart's trembling. I've found my place. Autumn arrived gently to Willowbrook, bringing with it moderate rains that, added to the rediscovered spring, transformed the landscape. The earth, once cracked and barren, began showing the first signs of recovery. Tender grass shoots dotted the prairies, and the cattle slowly regained their vigor. The union of Stone and Morrison lands was formalized to the amazement of the entire county. Victoria Ashford, who had decided to stay temporarily in San Antonio, attended the signing, closing a circle that had remained open for decades. "Your mother would be proud," she told Isabella after the ceremony, her green eyes bright with contained emotion. Rebecca always dreamed of healing old wounds. Nathan, who observed the scene from the big house gallery, seemed to have rejuvenated. The resolution of a conflict that had marked his entire life had visibly lightened the weight on his shoulders. That afternoon, while the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Isabella found Daniel by the pond that had formed around the spring. It had become her favorite place, an oasis of greenery in the middle of land slowly awakening from its lethargy. "I brought something for you," he said upon sensing her presence, without needing to turn to know it was her. In his hands he held a small object wrapped in an embroidered handkerchief. Upon unwrapping it, Isabella discovered a large dark seed polished until it seemed like a jewel. "Mesquite," explained Daniel, "the desert's most resistant tree. Its roots can reach 100 feet deep searching for water. It survives droughts that would kill any other plant." He took Isabella's hand and deposited the seed in her palm, closing her fingers around it. "It reminds me of you," he added, with that direct simplicity that was so his. "Beautiful and strong, capable of finding sustenance where others only see desolation." The gesture, simple but charged with meaning, touched Isabella more deeply than any grandiose declaration. In that moment, under the sky beginning to tint orange and purple, she made the decision that had been maturing in her heart. She stood on tiptoes and, with the determination of one who finally recognizes her own worth, kissed Daniel Crawford. Not at the corner of his lips like that time at the station, but fully pouring into that contact everything she had learned about love, that it wasn't possession, but shared freedom, not perfection, but mutual acceptance of scars and virtues. When they separated, the expression on Daniel's face was worth more than all the words in the world. In his dark eyes shone a light that spoke of silent promises and shared futures. "I love you, Isabella Stone," he said, using her true surname, for the first time, recognizing her completely for who she was. "I've loved you since the storm that brought you to my life." And she, who for so long had feared words that exposed the heart, responded with the simplicity she had learned from him. "And I love you, Daniel Crawford, with all my scars and all my hopes." The following spring arrived with an explosion of life that no one in Willowbrook remembered having seen before. The united lands of Stone and Morrison flourished like a testament to what cooperation could achieve where dispute had only brought desolation. The day of the annual festival, exactly 1 year after Isabella had danced for the first time in Daniel's arms, the community gathered not only to celebrate the season, but also to witness a special ceremony. Under an arch of flowering mesquites, descendants of that seed Daniel had given her, Isabella waited dressed in a simple ivory silk dress. Around her, the community she had come to love. Nathan, whose weathered face shone with paternal pride. Victoria, elegant as always, but with new warmth in her gaze. Sarah Brennan and the town inhabitants who had welcomed her as one of their own. And before her, Daniel Crawford, the man who had taught her that true love isn't proclaimed with shouts but built day by day, with small but constant gestures, with respect and patience, with the will to see the other as they are and love them precisely for it. The ceremony was brief but deeply meaningful. There were no grand speeches or grandiose promises, only the simple truth of two people who had found in each other not so much a lost half, but a mirror where they could see themselves complete and valued. When they exchanged rings, hers a silver band with small turquoise inlays, his a simple silver ring that complemented hers, words were unnecessary. Their gazes contained an entire story. The storm that had brought them together, the months of cautious approach, the revelations that had changed their lives, the spring that had saved the land, and above all, the love that had grown between them as constant and vital as the water that now flowed freely between both properties. That night, while celebrations continued in town, Isabella briefly stepped away from the party. With silent steps, she headed toward the small family cemetery where Rebecca Stone rested. The headstone, simple but dignified, gleamed under the full moon's silvery light. From her pocket, she extracted the cameo Nathan had given her months ago. She opened it, contemplating once more the face of the woman who had given her life and who, even in death, had guided her toward her true home. "Thank you," she whispered, placing a small bouquet of wildflowers beside the headstone. "For your courage, for your love, for the invisible threads you wove so I could find my way." A gentle breeze caressed her face, swaying the flowers and carrying with it the sweet aroma of reborn earth. Isabella closed her eyes, feeling a peace she had never known before. The wounds she had carried for so long, the feeling of abandonment, distrust, fear of not being enough, hadn't completely disappeared, but they had transformed into scars that no longer hurt, into reminders of a journey that had led her exactly where she needed to be. Upon returning to the celebration, she found Daniel waiting for her at the edge of the improvised dance floor, with the same expression as that first time, a mixture of respect and longing, of patience and barely contained desire. "Ready for another dance, Mrs. Crawford?" he asked, extending his hand toward her. Isabella took it without hesitation, allowing him to guide her toward the center of the floor, where other couples spun to the rhythm of violins and guitars. "With you," she responded, feeling how her body naturally molded to his. "I'm ready for a lifetime of dances." While they moved to the music's beat, under a starry sky that seemed to bless their union, Isabella reflected on the strange and beautiful path that had led her there. How an unexpected storm had changed her existence's course, how past pain had transformed into the seed of a future full of promises, how she had learned that true strength isn't in not needing anyone, but in daring to open the heart, knowing it might break. In Daniel's arms, with Nathan's proud gaze following them from the distance, and Victoria's serene smile illuminating her face, Isabella Harper, now Stone Crawford, finally understood the simplest yet deepest truth. She had found her refuge, not in a place, but in the silent souls who had welcomed her, respecting her silences, valuing her gifts, accepting her wounds, and celebrating her rebirth. And while the music continued, and the night wove its magic over Willowbrook, she knew with certainty that whatever happened, she would never feel lost again, because the most important journey hadn't been the one that brought her physically to this land, but the one that led her finally toward herself.